Welcome to 360 Money Matters, where financial planners Billy and Andrew talk all things financial planning. This podcast aims to increase your knowledge and confidence with all things money. Each week, they will cover topics like wealth creation strategies, investment principles, creating passive income, paying off your debt faster, and much, much more, so you can live a life on your terms without limits.
Hello and welcome back to another episode of the 360 Money Matters podcast. I'm Billy and I'm joined by my co-host,
Andrew. Bill's back again for another podcast.
Andrew, we are back again, and today we are talking about
the federal budget. Just got released, and so we're doing a deep dive into what are the outcomes of it, what's been promised, and how's it going to impact all of our viewers and listeners.
Federal budget in October.
Yeah. It's a little bit weird, isn't it?
Go figure. Did we just fall asleep for 6 months and we're in May, but we're in October?
Yeah, exactly right.
Sure.
It's a little bit earlier than what they normally do the federal budget, but it's come early. So I guess it tells our listeners and viewers that if the government is, reviewing their budgets more frequently than what they normally do, then you should probably be reviewing your household budget more frequently than you normally do, given there's, a fair few changes and a fair bit of, tumultuous. What's the word?
Tumultuousness.
Yeah,
that'll do.
Get it out. That's going on. So yeah.
Yeah, it's interesting. I mean, look, hopefully it's an indication by the government that they're more serious about the management of the economy, because the Labor Party in particular, in comparison to, I guess, the Liberal Party, have always been accused of being a bit more reckless with the budget. So hopefully this is a positive indicator that Dr. Chalmers, the Treasurer, is in control and he knows what he's doing and he's taking the job seriously. So fingers crossed. Yeah,
fingers crossed.
Yeah.
We'll see what happens and we'll unpack it a little bit and give everyone a bit of an understanding of what it means to them.
Absolutely. Time will tell. So probably the first thing that we'll jump in, not relevant for a huge portion of the population, but reducing the downsizer contributions in terms of what age you can trigger that. So downsizer contributions is basically when you sell your primary residence, you can take that money and as an extra amount, you can put that into superannuation as opposed to being limited by the caps that are normally in place. But that age there is usually 60 or older. That is now reducing to 55. Yep. So essentially it's encouraging people, once again, to release that equity from their property, downsize, and then contribute that to superannuation to be able to provide an income for them in retirement.
Yeah, which I think is awesome. I mean, that contribution used to be only a couple of years ago, or those rules were only available for those over the age of 65. So when you consider that it's gone from 65 to 60 to 55, I think what it does is it allows people that are entering into the retirement phases of their working career to be able to have more flexibility, more options, and be able to execute it on it sooner rather than later, rather than having to wait until the very end.
Yep. And I think it makes sense as well too, because we see so many people when we're talking to them at this particular point in their life, there's a reluctance there to sell the family home. And we see it all the time that a lot of people will do that almost to their own detriment as well too. Yeah. Whereas this is just another mechanism that encourages them and says, hey, there's something else on the table here. And as financial planners, it allows us to be able to model that out and say, hey, if we do this rather than that, the lifestyle impact, because your income amount is higher, could be quite significant. So yeah, I think it's a positive step in the right direction.
Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely. Yep. Another one that's impacting super funds.
Yes.
So in particular, the self-managed super funds, where there has been some previous talk around relaxing the residency requirements on self-managed super funds. So what that is if you're managing a self-managed super fund, previously you had to reside, or if you're a trustee of a self-managed super fund, you previously had to reside in Australia. Otherwise, you needed to appoint a power of attorney in order to make those decisions on your behalf. There was a previous commitment to relax those laws, and the Labor government is continuing with that. So they're moving forward with relaxing the residency laws. Doesn't come in, or not likely to come in, until July next year, but that's another positive for the self-managed super fund clients out there.
Yeah. Yep. Talking about the one that I'm probably the most excited about. So
everyone loves that one.
The previously legislated tax cuts, and we'll go into a little bit of detail shortly, obviously not coming into effect until July 2024. So the truth is there's a lot of water to pass under the bridge between now and then, because they could change their mind and pivot depending on what the economy does. But there was talk leading up to the budget that those stage 3 tax cuts were going to change.
Yeah.
And essentially what it is at the moment, as it currently stands, if you're earning between $45,000 and $120,000 a year, your tax rate is 32.5%. So what the proposal is, and it's actually not a proposal, it's legislated, but they're not winding it back, and that's what they had committed to during the budget, is that the tax rate will go to 30%, but the bracket from 45 all the way up to 200. So essentially, not only is there a reducing of marginal tax rate by 2.5% for people earning over 45,000, that will actually extend to people earning in excess of 120 all the way up to 200. So what that does is essentially it strips out the 37% tax bracket for people earning between 120 and $180,000.
Yeah, so basically anyone that's earning from 45 grand all the way up to 200,000 is going to pay a flat 30% tax in that tax bracket.
Correct. Yep.
So some good tax incentive that's out there for, this is something that impacts pretty much everyone. So
yeah,
definitely a positive there, and good to see that there's no changes to the amount of money that we're all paying the tax man.
Well, two things from that make me really excited. I mean, one, there's a reduction in the tax rate, which is fantastic. So going from 32 to 30%. And I think that's good, because you're right, that impacts the majority of the population sit in that tax bracket. So that's fantastic. The fact that they've extended it as well too is great, because it means more money in more people's pocket, which at some particular point in time will translate into some benefit for the economy.
Yeah.
But the thing that I really like about this as well too is our system in Australia is very, very complicated. So any steps towards simplifying this, I think, is a step in the right direction.
Yeah.
So yeah, I'm pretty excited about that from both angles.
Yeah, absolutely. And it certainly makes things a little bit easier, especially when you're talking to self-employed clients that own a company that are, paying company tax rates, and you're trying to work out, 37% if you're pulling money out of the business, less franking credits, when it's just a flat 30%. And, it's similar to what company tax rates are, albeit that's a little bit lower for small businesses now. It certainly simplifies the whole system and makes it, a lot easier to manage from both a tax perspective and a financial planning perspective as well.
Yeah, great. Andrew, next one.
Yeah, next one is around the pharmaceutical benefit scheme. So there's some additional benefits that the government is committed to spending in relation to the costs of pharmaceuticals and scripts, and that's essentially going from a co-payment from $42.50 per script as a maximum to $30 per script as a maximum. So they're committing to making the cost of medication, the cost of drugs, obviously legal ones, more affordable for every person in Australia as well.
Yeah, step in the right direction. Definitely going to help a lot of Australians. And I probably didn't appreciate this as much when I was younger, but I guess seeing my parents get older and things like that, and the amount of things that they needed to take in order to keep them healthy. Yeah. And it added up to quite an amount. So if, you're in that position, any help and support that you can get from making those medications cheaper and more accessible, I think is definitely a step in the right direction. And it's the right thing to do, because you're helping people that need it the most.
Yeah.
So I think that's a really positive outcome as well too, and hopefully over time we see that continue to get more and more support and more funding as the years go by.
Yeah.
Andrew, a big one that we were talking about earlier, because you're starting to have a look at this, but the paid parental leave scheme, there's also been some changes around that. Do you want to run us through what that looks like?
Yeah, something that impacts me and my family. Maybe not until when this one's kicking in on the 1st of July 2023, but maybe for the next child.
The next one, yep.
But yeah, I mean, look, previously, paid parental leave scheme, effectively there was 18 weeks that was allowed for the primary carer of a child, so 18 weeks payment on minimum wage, and the partner was allowed to have up to 2 weeks in terms of minimum wage to take some time off to also care for the child as well. Essentially, what's happening and what the government is doing is making it 20 weeks for the household. So you can split it up between 9 weeks each. You can split it up between 15 and 5, 20 for one person and none for the other person. Just means that it allows for a greater degree of flexibility within the overall scheme as well. The other thing that they're doing is there's previously been a cap on the primary carer, their income in the previous financial year, how much they can earn, whether they're eligible for this scheme or not. They're proposing having a family income limit, so increasing that up to $350,000 now for a family limit, really to be able to adjust for families where the primary carer is the one that's taking some time off, but they're the higher income earning spouse, and they're the person that's taking the majority of the time off, which previously would render them ineligible for paid parental leave. Now they're essentially making it a family test, or introducing a family test if you fail the individual test as well.
Yeah. Yep. I mean, look, going through it, you're almost smack bang in the middle of this.
Yep.
But going back to when we did it with our kids and stuff, it's a really difficult time, just period, because you're getting used to something new, especially for first-time parents. But the financial ramifications on this as well too obviously hit quite hard, and we're big advocates of planning in advance for that, for people that know that that's going to happen and stuff. So once again, step in the right direction. Anything that's going to help and alleviate some of that pressure, I think, is definitely a step in the right direction from the government's perspective.
Yeah. And further to that, there's also some benefits for when the child's a little bit older, and the childcare scheme as well. Yeah,
so childcare subsidy, essentially what this has done is it's just extending the maximum childcare subsidy rate from 85 to 90%. For families earning less than $80,000. So really support on the lower end of the spectrum, which is fantastic. And then there's been a little bit of a change as well too for the higher income families with the cap and stuff like that. So a little bit of tweaking with that. And once again, I think the government are looking at this from a really pragmatic perspective and trying to then offer support to people that might be on the cusp. And I remember my sister-in-law used to be in this position, but she used to turn around and say, hey, I'm not going to put the kids in childcare versus going to work, because I'm getting essentially the same amount of money back from the government with support than if I was going to go to work. So I think this is a little bit of a tweaking of the system to try and get the workforce participation up, especially in the event where we've got obviously low unemployment, record low unemployment. So yeah, good initiative, and I think that's going to help as well.
Yeah, absolutely. And so when those children grow up a lot older, aged care, there's some increased funding that's also going into the aged care sector, which I think you'd be hard pressed to find anyone that doesn't think that sector probably needs a little bit of love and needs a little bit of increased funding. So there is also some commitment to increasing and improving the aged care sector in Australia as well.
Yeah, I mean, look, healthcare in Australia is quite good. In the aged care sector, and touch wood, I've been fortunate that none of our family members have needed to go through it. In saying that, we've helped a lot of families with that transition from a planning perspective. So really the improvements around this are to try and get better quality care and more care for the residents of aged care facilities. So one of the initiatives, which I think is great, is to have a registered nurse in the facility 24/7.
Yep.
And that's from 1 July 2023. Thinking about it, if I ever did that for my parents, you'd kind of want and expect
You'd almost think that would
You'd
just
think
be a
that would
given.
be a given, but it's not.
Yeah.
So having this in there definitely makes sense. And then the amount of care that they receive, being the residents of an aged care facility, that's going to increase in terms of how many minutes or hours per day of care that they should be receiving.
Yeah.
So I think having that baseline is really important because, you know, you don't want to think of these horror stories where your parents or your grandparents are in an aged care facility and they're not receiving any care from anybody. This is basically setting a line in the sand.
Yeah, exactly right. Exactly right. Next one is really around the first home buyer guarantee. Now, this is specifically to regional first home buyers. We've seen something similar to this in the past in that, 5% deposit, no mortgage insurance for first home buyers.
Yep.
This is essentially an extension of that. The only difference is that it's only for regional first home buyers. So if you're buying regional, if you're a first home buyer, there is the ability to be able to, take advantage of getting into the property market sooner rather than later.
Yep.
With a lower deposit and not having to pay mortgage insurance as well. Limited places, so similar to what it was last time in that there's, a rush towards it. I think there's 35,000 places that are open for this scheme.
Yep.
So it's one of those things that people, start talking to their banks, start locking in places if it's something that you are going to utilise.
Yeah, and look, I mean, the number of limited places and stuff, if there's take-up and the government are really supportive of it, they'll just extend it.
Yeah, I think they did that last time.
Yeah, I think that would make sense. But once again, I think it's a good initiative. That can go even further if you're a single parent as well too. So there is some provisions in there to try and help people get, security of accommodation by being able to access a roof over your head.
Yeah.
Once again, I think it's a really great initiative and it's designed to help people that need the most amount of support. So definitely a step in the right direction and hopefully we see some positive take-up with that across the board.
Yeah, absolutely.
And then the last one, which is probably a really big one, it's kind of our fascination with property continues. We'll just caveat there. But look, there's a push and an initiative from the government and they're using different mechanisms and different triggers in order to do this. But basically they want to get more housing and make it more affordable right across the board. So one of the initiatives that they've come out with is having, and the devil is in the detail here, but they're pledging $10 billion to be invested to create basically a fund to help house 1 million new, well-located homes from 2024 over a 5-year period.
Yeah.
And this is across all states and territories. That was a little bit of a mouthful.
Yeah.
But the idea is increasing the housing stock that's available and not just doing it in areas that, are really accessible and maybe people don't want to live there because the cost of building those could be cheaper because land might be cheaper or what have you, but it's well located. Who knows what that means? The government are pledging $10 billion, not to spend $10 billion on it. They're actually using the investment returns from the $10 billion in order to roll this out.
Yeah. So a bit of a change in that they're not just throwing money at it and they're not just, giving money for the sake of it. They're actually building properties, creating an investment return off the back of it, and then using that investment return to be able to deploy towards various schemes.
Which makes sense from a sustainability perspective and a longevity point of view. Definitely makes sense, and you kind of think, okay, an initiative like that, if we started that 20, 30, 40 years ago, that would be fantastic. So if this works, maybe this is something for future generations that can definitely help out.
Provided that future governments all stay on the same track.
Well, hopefully the short-term thinking of governments disappears and they start thinking more long-term for the benefit of the country. But there's also been a change in approach with this as well too, where the government also partnering with industry, so superannuation funds, and saying, hey, let's find investment opportunities to do some social good so we can help the population of Australia, but also from an investment return perspective, you guys, being the superannuation funds, can get a return
on your investment
for your members. So this is some really clever thinking around the back of this. I don't know exactly how it's going to work out, but this is kind of a really I think, great approach. And we've seen similar things with infrastructure projects before. And not that this is not infrastructure, but you see it with things like road tolls and stuff like that.
Yeah.
Whereas this is actually specifically for housing. I think it's a good initiative in theory. I guess the whole thing is how the rubber meets the road, and the devil's going to be in the detail, as they say.
Yeah.
But I think conceptually, I think it could work.
Yeah, yeah. And there's a few sort of major people that the government is trying to help out with this.
Yep.
So, you're talking about construction repairs in, remote Indigenous communities. I think the other one that's really massive is the transitional and crisis accommodation.
Yes.
For women and children fleeing domestic violence.
Mm-hmm.
That's pretty massive.
Yep.
So yeah, another initiative that's going to help people that need the assistance and need the help. So yeah, we'll see how that one pans out. But yeah, certainly on the surface looks like an initiative that can help a fair few people that are in need.
Yeah, and just extending on that, veterans and people who are at risk of homelessness as well too.
Yeah.
For such a wealthy country, we shouldn't have a homelessness problem, but we do. Hopefully this goes some way to alleviating that as well too. So yeah, all in all, Andrew, I think it's a pretty positive budget, and so far so good. We'll wait and see.
Yeah. I mean, look, from my perspective, the thing that I think is probably key in not key in all of this, but probably underpins all of this is I think the government's also been very cautious around not exacerbating the inflation problem. You can see that a lot of the measures are quite, measured in its approach, in that it's not going to, flood an economy with a huge amount of money and spur on huge economic growth, because even though, that's great and that's fantastic, and as financial advisors, it's happy days for our clients, they're really trying to not impact inflation massively.
Yeah.
And trying to deliver the support where it's needed rather than just, throwing it into the market.
Yep. And just on that too, because that's a really key point, the budget deficit that was projected, there's still a deficit, but it's halved.
Yep.
So rather than being $70 billion in deficit, it's now $35 billion. So that's great.
So they've lost money, but just not as much money as we expected.
Which is a positive, right? You'll never understand that. The second thing is that based on the modelling that they've done, they expect inflation to peak by December of this year,
Yep.
which is fantastic. And then over the course of 2023 and into 2024, get back into its target band during 2024.
Yeah.
So if that's the case, we've got, I guess, a year or a peak at the end of this year, and then a year of things, assuming that it goes like that, a year of things starting to not necessarily stop increasing, but stop increasing at such a large pace.
Yeah. So we're hopefully a light at the end of the tunnel for all of the household budgets out there.
Fingers crossed. We'll wait and see. Wait and see. So Andrew, that's pretty much it in a really quick nutshell. There's a lot of detail out there, a lot of stuff in the media as well too, and probably by the time this goes to air, a lot of people would have probably moved on and forgotten about it anyway. But look, maybe it's a good refresher.
Exactly right.
Yeah.
Exactly right. We're recording our episodes maybe sometimes a little bit too far in advance.
That's it. That's it.
Well, Bills, thanks again for another great podcast. And thanks again to all of our viewers and listeners. And if there's any questions, anything that you want in further detail, please feel free to reach out. Our details are in the show notes.
We'll catch you on the next one. Thanks. Thanks for listening today. If you have any questions on what we talked about or would like to have a chat about your money journey, visit us at 360fs.com.au.
Just a reminder to our listeners that the information contained in this podcast is general in nature and it is not intended as personal recommendations for the audience. Please consider whether the information suits your circumstances before acting on it. This information is provided by Billy Amiridis and Andrew Nicolaou of 360 Financial Strategists Pty Ltd, authorized representatives and credit representatives of AMP Financial Planning.